for this particular session, I just have a few slides, if you don't mind, before we go to the actual conversation on it. So the title of this particular presentation is Media Appearances as Part of Our Academic Life. I'm not sure if this is being presumptuous of me to say that, but please bear with me as I try to explain the circumstances as to why media appearances could be considered part of academic life. So before we start, we have to define first what we mean by public engagement, and then we want to know the role of faculty and researchers in addressing public issues, as well as have some notes regarding media appearances, although these are more reminders for all of us. I'm sure you're all aware of what media appearances are, as well as the nature of such appearances across different forms of media. How to prepare for interviews and some tips during interviews. We will try to cover some of the basics because, of course, as colleagues, we all know how to prepare and what to do during the interview proper. So again, these are more reminders more than anything else. And then some social media strategy that we may consider as regards promoting or informing people of our media appearances. And then we want to also have some remarks on the enabling environment so that we can strengthen public engagement within the university. So I would guess that the last part would be more interesting to our administrators and for some of us who may hold administrative positions in the university. But even if we are quote unquote ordinary mortals in the academe, maybe we can also consider some of the points here in the last part. Anyway, before we go to the last part, of course, we go to the first part. So we start with the definition of public engagement. There's a United Kingdom-based group called the National Coordinating Center for Public Engagement. And basically, if you would see there, the direct quote, public engagement is multifaceted because there are various ways to do it. But the bottom line is that we try to do sharing with the public as regards the activities and some of the benefits of higher education. So if you would notice, this particular definition by the UK-based group presupposes some form of privilege that's accorded to those in higher education, you know, people like us, faculty and researchers. So this is something worth sharing to the public. So engagement, by definition, it's not really a one-way process where we have the vision of us in the ivory tower and then, you know, sharing to the knowledge-deprived ones what we need to share, or us being quote-unquote experts or public intellectuals. It's actually a two-way process because on one hand, it's true we get to share our knowledge or whatever it is that we know of a certain topic, but at the same time, we interact, we listen, and we learn from the public engagement that we've chosen to embark on. The goal is to generate mutual benefits. So that's one of the key terms with regard to assessing the importance of public engagement and why it is an inherent part of our academic life. Now, for some of us who may be familiar with communication processes, actually there are three kinds of communication in terms of what we call interpersonal communication. So there's the dyadic communication. As the term suggests, it's communication between two people. But of course, we will focus more on the two other forms of communication, which are organizational and mass communication. So when we say organizational communication, the group is readily identifiable. For example, in whether it's a large group or a small group that's meeting, we can easily identify people either through attendance sheets or through logs that can be registered as we prior to the start of the meeting. So that's one characteristic in organizational communication. As we all know, the audience is readily identifiable. In class discussions, that's also the case. We know who our students are by virtue of the class list, just to be specific about it. Now, in mass communication, it's different from organizational communication in the sense that the nature of the audience is inherently anonymous. While certain platforms like YouTube would have numbers of views or numbers of engagements like the likes and the dislikes on videos, we really don't know whether or not, let's say, 1 million views would be equivalent to 1 million unique individuals. For all you know, one person may have viewed a certain video 100 times, right? So if you look at old media like television or radio or even print, you can only go to the extent of coming up with certain benchmarks. For example, in the print media, just so you know, in newspapers, the average pass on readership is 5. So if you have a publication, a newspaper that has, let's say, a 200,000 circulation, 200,000 copies being circulated nationwide, you can assume that 1 million people read it. But again, that's just a benchmark. If you have a newspaper in the library, for example, you don't know whether or not there are 5 people who have read it, or maybe there are more people who have read it. Of course, it depends on the level of interest of the students if they actually visit a library, right? This is prior to the pandemic, by the way. But just to point out the fact that on television, radio, and print, you really don't know the audiences. You can get an idea, you can have certain benchmarks. For example, for television and radio, you can come up with audience shares from where you can make certain deductions as to the estimated number of listeners or viewers. But these are just estimates. And with social media converging and adapting certain media content from TV, radio, and print, it becomes even more complicated insofar as identifying the audiences. Anyway, that's the bottom line with regard to mass communication. And in mass communication, some of the forms of engagement, public engagement, would be the public lectures that we do. Sometimes they call it professorial chairs, right? And then, of course, the social media engagements, assuming that we have our own Facebook, Twitter accounts, or Instagram, and our social media accounts are set to public. Okay. Actually, even you can even counter argue that even if your social media accounts are for friends only, some of your networks may take a screenshot of your post and then make it more public, right? Or post it outside your particular network. So there is some degree of public engagement there as well. So anyway, the bottom line here is in mass communication, the media appearances would just be a small part of public engagement. Whether we may be conscious of it or not, we do our share of public engagement already. The fact that we hold classes every semester, and when you talk about multiplier effect, sometimes the students would give feedback as regards our lectures to their relatives, to their friends, to their loved ones. So sometimes they get to know whatever it is that we say inside the classroom. Okay? So media appearances, however, compared to organizational communication or even public lectures and social media engagements, there is a possibility that there is a wider reach with regard to our intended message for the simple reason that the audience base of a news media organization may be larger than we think, right? So there is that possibility also with regard to media appearances. So that's why there is, if we want to interact with a broader audience, no matter how anonymous it may be, media appearances would be the way to go. Now, what is our role in terms of addressing public issues? So Dr. Bautista mentions the term public intellectual a while ago. And if we look at Alan Lightman's article, the full citation will be provided at the end of this presentation. There are said to be three levels of being a public intellectual in terms of the coverage of your discourse, public discourse. So level one, of course, that's the easiest to understand. You write or speak about, or you write or talk about what concerns your discipline. So for example, if it's business administration or economics, you would be interviewed about that particular topic. For example, with regard to the shutdown of ABS-CBN, perhaps people may be interested to know about this creature called PDRs, or Philippine Depositary Receipts, right? So, and sometimes even the media would have a wrong spelling of it. Is it really depository with an O or depositary with an A, right? So only experts like you can more authoritatively talk about it. Now, level two is a little bit tricky in the sense that according to Lightman, you can speak and write about your discipline to the public, and then you will relate your discipline, excuse me, you will relate it as to, you would relate it to the world around it. So what does this mean? So basically, you will relate, for example, something political like charter change to, if it's economics, then how will this affect foreign investors? What would be the implications of changes to the Constitution with regard to freeing up what used to be protected industries, or those that are exclusive to Filipino citizens, or things like that. So you try to relate your discipline to the burning issues of the day, or maybe the economics of community pantries, right? How sustainable would the community pantries be? So that's how level two public intellectualism happens. Now, level three would pertain to you talking about a wide range of issues, not necessarily within your discipline. As we all know, Albert Einstein is more into physics with regard to his academic background, but he does talk about justice, peace, and some of you may even be familiar with his treatise on socialism. So at first you would wonder, what has Einstein got to do with socialism or any discourse pertaining to mode of production? Of course, it has to do with his social status, with his public persona. So there are certain academicians who have taken on that particular terrain, if you may, in terms of public discourse. We all know, for example, that Noam Chomsky is more into linguistics, but he really does talk about media or ownership or the evils of capitalism. So, of course, there are certain goals that are set by these particular public intellectuals in terms of how much they can talk about issues that are beyond their discipline. But what cannot be denied would be the public recognition that is given to such intellectuals. So whether or not you agree with these levels, I'm just putting it out there because Alan Lightman, particularly in his MIT Communications Forum, provided some interesting points about certain hierarchies about public intellectualism. So anyway, but of course, if you ask me what would be our objectives in terms of, addressing public issues, of course, we can think of a lot of objectives, but for me, there are three basic ones. First, we want to popularize our research, given the limited reach of many academic journals. And I'm sure you can relate to that because we all publish refereed articles, and in fact, it's required of us for tenure or even for promotion. So we need to do that so that people will be made aware of the research that we do. So it's as simple as that. Because if you just let the refereed publications take care of, or the refereed journals take care of the popularization of your research, there's nothing much to expect. Although I have to hasten to add that there are efforts by many peer-reviewed journals, including the top-tier Scopus listed or Web of Science listed ones, where they do podcasts to popularize the research. And they also take on social media personas to also promote it to the bigger public. For example, the journal that I edit, Media Asia, the first issue, you can see the cover there. We have a Twitter account, but we have to admit, much as we hate to admit it, that the readership is very limited. For example, based on our journal metrics data, we only have 27,000 downloads last year. So actually, for an international journal, it's not that much, if you ask me. And especially if you compare it with other online publications that are not academic in nature. So their downloads or even their hits on their websites would be much, much higher compared to our own journal. So popularization is one reason. Second, this is a little bit idealistic, so I apologize in advance if you find it idealistic. We have to champion truth-telling given the preponderance of fake news. So as a journalism educator, we do pay much attention, we are very much concerned with the lies, misinformation, and disinformation that's happening. And even red tagging could be considered as the highest form of fake news. Our universities, both UP and DLSU, have been the subjects of red tagging, and I think there is a real need for academics coming from our respective universities to register our voices, if only for the sake of truth telling. So it can be on the level of defending our universities, given the fake news that's spreading right now, or so that's level 2, right? That's level 2 public intellectualism. Or maybe just focus on level 1 public intellectualism, wherein you talk about your discipline and why your research, for example, is very important in the lives of ordinary people. So to champion truth-telling would be the second reason. Now, third, and I have to make a distinction between your publications record, and the discipline and your research interest. What you're trying to promote here is your discipline. So whether it's economics, business administration, finance, so you want to promote that particular discipline. And then at the same time, you hope to promote also your research interest. So whether or not this is small and medium enterprises, or income generation, or fiscal management, fiscal policy, so or strategic management. So these particular research interests may sound too alien or maybe too intimidating for ordinary people, most especially those who are afraid of mathematics, for example. So there is a need to promote that, to make it more understandable or more digestible to ordinary people, or even for academics, for colleagues who may belong to a different discipline. So those three objectives would be the major reasons for me. Of course, later on, please feel free to weigh in and then mention other aspects of addressing public issues. But for now, if we venture into the topic itself, which is media appearance, we have to also remind ourselves that when we say media appearance, it's not just television. We refer to at least four forms of media. Uh, First, we want to talk about print. One attribute of print would be permanence. because anything that's printed has a certain degree of authority and credibility. Okay, of course, I'm using it in quotation marks. Uh, Anything that's printed would be assumed to be permanent because it went through an editing process, a vetting process, or even just the technical proofreading process. So it went through different pairs of eyes. So therefore, if there is a fact that's printed, it should be, theoretically at least, unassailable. And that would partly explain why if newspapers would do their jobs in terms of covering certain issues, print would theoretically be more comprehensive. Why? Because for newspapers or magazines, there is a prescribed deadline for submitting articles, and then such articles will be printed either the next day or in the next issue date, right? So theoretically, the print journalists would have more time in terms of doing research, in terms of providing context to to the topic that he or she is assigned to cover. So in the same way, if you are interviewed in print, sometimes when you're interviewed, you have more time to reflect on a certain question. I don't want to say that you can give long-winded questions, long-winded answers. We'll talk about that later. But you have the luxury of time in terms of explaining to a print journalist what you want to say about a certain issue. Now, radio is a bit different because as soon as something happens, usually the breaking news would be coming from radio and to some extent social media. But we'll talk about the new media later on. Now, immediacy is also a factor here with regard to radio. So that's one attribute that you cannot find in print. To some extent, you can get it on television, but we'll talk about the immediacy factor on television later. Immediacy on radio is inherent because you don't need to write a script for a broadcast. I have experience in radio, and I also do script writing for radio. I did script writing in radio in the past, and I can tell you right now that for a 1 hour program, sometimes you can just have a 3 or 4 page talking points, okay, where you would have a discussion flow, and then there is a specific time limit as to when you would segue to another topic or to a commercial break or whatever it is. But the bottom line here is, despite those talking points, if there is something that's breaking, you can immediately broadcast it as long as you are able to fact check everything prior to airing. So that's one factor with radio. So you only need your voice uh, to produce the content. With television, there is audio and visual component there. So unlike in radio, you cannot just simply use your voice to broadcast. You need to have footage, video footage of a particular unfolding event. So sometimes you need a particular script and you need to edit the footage into something more understandable to the audience. For example, if you only have, let's say, 30 seconds to broadcast or to break something, to then that footage should be properly uh, edited, and there should be a particular script where the news anchor or the reporter would say something, and then the footage would be shown, and then another file footage would be shown as well. So there is a need for some degree of editing. So that's why the immediacy may be found there, but it's not as immediate, for lack of a better word, compared to radio. Of course, for new media, there is that element of convergence. So we all know that one online journalist defined online journalism as the permanence of print and the immediacy of broadcast. So you can find that in online publications because, of course, the kind of permanence that you find there would be different from print because, well, because of the nature of the online publication. Okay, so you still see the printed word there, but there is a combination of online. You have a combination of print and video footage, so you can integrate the different texts so that it's not just the printed word that you see, but also the pictures and the video files. Okay, so those are the main attributes of the forms of media. Now, there are certain things that we need to remember with regard to media appearances. So a while ago, I mentioned that given the character of print, you can provide more detailed explanations to the print journalist. That much is true. However, you should be able to provide straightforward answers as well. So if it's a yes or no question, then you start off by saying yes and then or no, depending on how you will answer it, and then provide a short explanation if it's necessary. But sometimes if it's a yes or no question, you just simply say yes or no, and then you leave it to the interviewer to ask why. Now, short and crisp explanation would also be necessary, most especially on television and radio, because we have to understand that if it's live TV or live radio, uh, there is a time limit as to how long you will be on air. And of course, as a matter of courtesy and of course for technical reasons, the producers or even the host wouldn't tell you that you only have 30 seconds left. So they seldom say that, okay, if at all. So that's why you have to give due respect to the time. So you have to ensure that your explanations will be as direct to the point as possible. Of course, you have to be insightful on one hand, but understandable on the other. So it's a very, very delicate combination between providing depth of explanation on one hand and then using the simplest of words to make things more understandable to a broader audience. So sometimes it's very challenging for academics like us, where we teach our students, especially those who major in our respective disciplines. We can sometimes get away with explaining, with mentioning or dropping some of the jargon or some of the technical terms without needing to define them properly, right? Because we assume that our students already know what these jargon or technical terms are. But for a broader audience, it's very different. And sometimes you have to avoid jargon, or if you cannot avoid them, at least make an effort to explain what the jargon mean, okay? One of the tips that I usually get from public speakers, those who advocate the simplicity in sending messages would be to be conscious of the words that we use. One benchmark would be to choose words that are 3 syllables or fewer. So of course, these are just benchmarks because sometimes words like globalization, liberalization, or privatization would be more than 3 syllables, right? But sometimes it's better to have fewer syllables than 3 syllables or more. For example, conflagration would be better off replaced with fire. Utilization would be better off replaced with use. Anyway, you know the pattern. So those are just some tips on how to make points more understandable. Diction would be the key here. We can be serious when we do media appearances, and in fact, sometimes we're expected to be serious because we are academics and we try to project a certain degree of authority on the topic. But it wouldn't hurt to smile. So if you can see Dr. Bentihanki when he appeared on ANC, definitely he knows how to smile, right? So if you have a smiling demeanor, more or less the audiences wouldn't be so, well, not really terrified, but wouldn't be so intimidated by your credentials and would try to listen to what you have to say. So if you combine that smiling demeanor with being understandable or with being able to speak clearly, then of course audiences would appreciate that very much. Now, of course, the basic rule of thumb when it comes to interviews is if you're asked in Filipino, sasagot tayo sa wikang Filipino. If you're asked in English, then you would answer in English. Can you do code switching? I think so. Of course, it's a matter of opinion. Sometimes we do code switching to stress an important point. For example, you may, keep on explaining in English and then you would end your sentence with, ganun po talaga kasi eh, di ba? So sometimes that can help in terms of trying to stress, the important points that you said in English. Okay? So that can be done, okay, if you ask me. But of course, if you prefer to speak in straight English, so that your audience would understand you more, or you think that it's more authoritative that way, it's also a matter of preference. What I'm trying to stress here is there are no right or wrong ways to answer during media interviews. It's all up to us for as long as we don't compromise our serious demeanor or serious but smiling demeanor, and for as long as we are understandable. Pero syempre po, ang pinagsisikapan din po natin ay yung makapagsalita rin tayo ng mahusay sa sariling atin, sa wikang Filipino. Kasi minsan meron ding mga nag-i-interview sa atin na yung programa ay talagang ginagamit yung wikang Filipino. Kaya minsan mahalaga rin na ginagamit din natin itong wikang ito. Pero syempre kung talagang hirap tayo na magsalita sa wikang Filipino sa simula, pwedeng sabihin natin na magsasalita na lang po ako sa wikang English, so here I go. And then you would keep on explaining yourself in English. Of course, in due time, we may need perhaps to adjust to our audiences, because in journalism, it's like this. It's the journalist who adjusts to the audience. It's not the other way around. So for example, if a particular community, for example, you would, let's say, transfer or, okay, let's put it this way. I'm trying to think in terms of region, but perhaps we can just focus on Tagalog. For example, if there is a news program that is said in Tagalog, then it may be important for us to use Tagalog as medium of communication, because the audiences would be more comfortable understanding the message in the language that is set by that particular program. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the audiences wouldn't understand you if you spoke in English. Of course, people will be able to still understand you, but sometimes sensitivity to the audience should also be taken into account. So that's why if you are part of the pool of speakers or the pool of resource persons for De La Salle University, it may be advisable to also consider speaking in Filipino so that you would be able to adjust based on the preferred target audience of a particular program. Actually, I can even stretch the argument further. If some of you belong to the provinces and are familiar with the language of that particular province, for example, my wife is from Bicol, my parents are from Bicol, but I'm raised here in Manila. So, diit lang po ako mag-Bicol, pero dainatig papabakal. Right? So, I don't speak Bicol that well. But if there comes a time that my wife and I would transfer in the Bicol to the Bicol region, and that's part of our plan when we retire. And if ever, by some chance, I would get interviewed by the media there, then I will have to try my best to speak in Bicol as well, because there is a need to be sensitive to our audience. It's not as if they will adjust to us. Sometimes we have to make an effort to adjust to them as well. So, well, anyway, that's all we have to say about that particular slide. So if we go to the other topic about preparing for the interview, again, these are just some of the basic points. And I'm confident that you already know these things. So this is just a matter of reminding us about the basics. Of course, even if we are already specialists in our chosen discipline, prior to the interview, we still need to be updated regarding the topic. It wouldn't hurt to reread, even for the 100th time or for the 1000th time, some of the references that we're already familiar with. And in the process of research, we try to anticipate the questions. Now, sometimes I get asked, this fundamental query. Is it okay for the source of information, meaning you, to ask, to request that questions be given to you in advance? Actually, it can be done. The answer is yes. But we cannot just depend on the questions that will be sent to us, because it is possible that the host will be asking follow-up questions, or depending on your answers. Or sometimes there are some hosts or interviewers that would go off script, wherein they will ask a different set of questions, right? So for whatever reason, it's not because they want to get even with you or they want to irritate you. I doubt if that's the reason. Sometimes, as the interviewer prepares for the show, he or she may think of a different approach. And sometimes it's already too late to make changes to the script because it has been already sent to you, right? So, of course, it's good to get the questions in advance, but we cannot be complacent regarding the questions that will be asked of us. So we have to anticipate other questions as well. And sometimes we are in a better position to make the assessment as to which aspects of the topic would be worth discussing more. And sometimes we tend to explain based on what we know would be worth sharing with people. Now, aside from anticipating the question, it would help if we familiarize ourselves with the interviewer and with the format of the program. Sometimes what I do is, if I'm not familiar, totally familiar with the program or with the interviewer, I try to catch the latest article or the latest episode of that particular program so that I would be more familiar with how they run things or how they ask questions, or just simply the time limit that's allotted for for one-on-one interviews. So if you realize that okay, like this particular program is only good for 10 minutes, and at most the interviewer will be asking only 3 questions. So more or less, you have an idea as to how long and how short your answer should be. But if a particular segment would be about 20 minutes or 30 minutes, then you have to prepare yourself for the long haul. And sometimes it would help if you bring with you a bottle of water, right? If it's 20 to 30 minutes long, because you might end up, out of breath or whatever. Of course, the third point, it's very obvious. We have to know that there's a difference between the actual airing time and the call time. For example, in the case of ABS-CBN, prior to its shutdown, usually the call time is 30 minutes before airing. So for example, if the show starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, then you have to be there at 7:30. Because, well, for various reasons, because you have to prepare for makeup. Number two, the producers would want to be sure that you'll be there. Otherwise, they'll be in a panic, right? They'll be panicking, okay, if the guests aren't there yet. So there are various reasons. So there's a difference between airtime and call time. So that's just the point of this particular reminder. Okay, so we focus more on the call time rather than the airtime. Okay, how to prepare? Of course, for online interviews, and it seems that during the lockdown, during the pandemic, media appearances are done mainly online. Okay, so I don't know of any program right now wherein the guests can now come into the studio. Okay, so I'm not aware of any program that does that. Well, maybe you can share something later on. Which brings us to the OOTD, or the outfit of the day. Of course, it can be formal or semi-formal. So it's up to you. Uh, Now, what? Why do I need to mention green? Of course, LaSalle's color is green. But unfortunately, if you want to do a live studio appearance, green may not be a good idea. Most especially in situations where the studio would use a green chroma background. Okay, so the background behind you would be green. Uh, for a reason, because sometimes they do backgrounds through special effects. So usually the green chroma will clash with anything that you wear that's color green. So unless you want to have your head like a floating device, green is not a good idea. Anyway, so light makeup will do. So that applies to both women and men. So from my experience with regard to TV appearances, I think they use foundation, and sometimes it's not lipstick. Is it lip gloss or some? I'm sorry, I'm not an expert when it comes to makeup, but they do that as well. So yeah, so that's why there was a time when prior to the pandemic, I would have with me cotton and Eskinol, or any astringent lotion, astringent, yeah, so that you can wipe the makeup away. But if you want to do your makeup yourself, light makeup will have to do. Okay. Anyway, some tips during the interview proper. Actually, there are a lot, but these are just some of the most basic ones. Again, these are more reminders than information that you don't know, because I assume that you already know these things as well. So number one, of course, we think of the interview as a classroom or any other comfort zone that you may think of. For example, if you're very comfortable with a thesis defense, then think of the interview as a thesis defense, right? Or whatever, okay? Or an academic conference, right? So if it's your comfort zone, then you think of it that way. Breathing helps you relax. So science has proven that. Of course, smiling, at least it works for me, wherein somehow my state of nervousness can be gone, okay, whenever I smile. So right now, you can get an idea as to why I smile a lot in front of you, because I'm very nervous, right? Anyway, so if you want, if you cannot, actually the most basic in interviewing is you try your best to look the interviewer in the eye, so that you can sound sincere and you can be confident about what you want to say. But sometimes it can be very intimidating if you look your interviewers in the eyes, right? So one technique that I've adopted through the years, or at least when I was just starting out, especially when I was still editor-in-chief of Ibon Foundation, way back in the 1990s, where I became spokesperson of that particular institution. So I remember in the 1990s, sometimes I would be very, very nervous, getting inside the studio. And for those of you who have experienced getting inside a TV studio, it's very, very cold there, right? So the air conditioning is like, set to the lowest temperature. So it's like you uh, visiting Korea during winter. So anyway, or you being inside the freezer. So it can sometimes contribute to your state of nervousness. Now, sometimes what you can do is, if you don't want to look your interviewer in the eye, you try to fixate yourself on the object behind the interviewer, and then you try to look at that particular object. So sometimes it's like looking at your interviewer in the eye, okay? And as long as you don't tell your interviewer that you're looking somewhere else, the interviewer would think that you're looking at him or her in the eye. So anyway, now the other way to assuage whatever feeling we have inside studio would be not looking at the camera, okay? Or even the audiences. If there is a live audience or even just a group of people watching or listening to you. Or sometimes even if you're inside a radio booth, sometimes the radio booth would just have, you know, you and the host and maybe one or two technicians. Don't think of perhaps the millions or the thousands listening to you right now, so that you don't get intimidated or you don't get pressured into saying something quote unquote intelligent. Try not to think about it. And for me, that also works. If you just imagine it as some sort of a conversation and then you take out the audiences from the equation, right? So that can help. Last point, don't talk too fast, because sometimes the tendency of people, and I've read that in some psychology journals, the tendency of some people would be to talk too fast if they're nervous or they're intimidated, because they want to get it over with, and as soon as you're able to answer, your assumption is you can get out of the studio immediately. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So try not to talk too fast. Just talk naturally. Okay? Kumbaga sa wikang Filipino, parang ano, sakto lang, di ba? So not too slow and not too fast either. Okay? Actually, you can, sometimes you can also counter-argue, you can afford to talk slowly, but only to ensure that you get your point more clearly. Okay? So in that respect, you can talk slowly. So you can do that. Okay, so some post appearance social media strategy. So if you have a Twitter account or a Facebook account or Instagram or any other social media account, you can promote your own media appearance after it's aired or after something gets published. So these are two of the most recent media appearances that I had. I'm trying to counter check if it's May 4 and May 5. Yeah, so that's the most recent. Well, at least the ones that I know of that's been published already. Of course, you can ask, can you make a plugging prior to a media appearance? Of course, you can do that. But the problem there is that it's like this. Sometimes you can get interviewed, let's say, on television, and then there is an assurance that and then the reporter would say that we're planning to air this tonight. Sometimes it may not work because the reporter is not the one who determines what gets aired or not. It's the station managers, right? That's one. Second, you're trying to compete with airtime with other sources of information. So I hope you don't get offended if at one time you would get interviewed and then that topic gets aired on television and then your interview is nowhere to be found and there are other sources of information. Sometimes it can happen, okay? So there's nothing disrespectful about it. These are just judgment calls. It's called gatekeeping in media parlance. These are judgment calls made by the reporter or the station manager. Sometimes the reporter would would submit, let's say, a 2-minute report, and then the station manager would say, no, this should be only 1 minute long. So it's your interview that gets cut. Okay, so it can happen. So sometimes when you plug it and then people expect it to air, then people will ask you what happened, right? And then, so that's why in my case, I don't do that. I usually just simply post my media appearances after the fact, okay? Not before, so that I spare myself from any, potential embarrassment, okay? So that's it. But with regard to live interviews, for example, if you're already inside the studio and then you want to plug that you'll be interviewed live on this particular show, chances are it will happen. So you can afford to do that prior to the actual airing of the interview. So it's your judgment call, okay? Now, yeah, okay. So I took screenshots of my YouTube channel and my Spotify account just to highlight the fact that it would help if you have, let's say, Spotify, YouTube, or any other account on audio sharing or video sharing sites, because sometimes your media interviews could be there. So for example, in the case of YouTube, I don't need to re-upload or to save through a third-party software the video files and then upload it on my channel. Sometimes I can just save it as part of my playlist coming from the YouTube channels, let's say, of the ABS-CBN News Channel, the GMA News Channel, 1PH, UNTV, etc. So it's just a matter of, googling yourself. Sorry, googling. It's just a matter of searching your name through the YouTube website, and then you can find there the different video files that mentions your name, or that wherein you have your own particular interview, and then you can just save it in your playlist. So that can help promote your social media appeal. That can help use or maximize social media with regard to your media appearances. So with Spotify, it's the same thing. You can come up with your own playlist, and then, for example, I titled it interviews, and then everything is there. Okay, so you can do that for your social media strategy. Now, these are just a couple of slides that may be worth looking at if you're an administrator. As I said, maybe, just maybe, we can try to have additional points for media appearances or public engagements that can be used for tenure and promotion. I mean, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying here is that journal refereed publications would still be a major factor for tenure or promotion, but it wouldn't hurt to add points for media appearances. In the University of the Philippines, we already do that. We can list down in our, what do you call that, in our form, in the form that we fill out for promotion, where we try to list our publications, our accomplishments. So there's a particular section there for media appearances. Of course, you need to provide proof of media appearance. So it can be a screenshot of your media interview, or it can be a clipping of the print publication or the online publication where you were quoted by the media. And other proof or evidence of appearance. Now, you can also try to expand media partnerships. So I think this is the most practical. From what I know, you have the view from TAF, which is a column in Business World. I noticed that the most recent published article there was, again, by Dr. Tihanki last May 3. Okay? So from what I know, please correct me if I'm wrong, this is a rotating column. The title is constant, in other words, but the columnists or the writers would be, different people, okay? So you can try to expand that for other publications, wherein it's not just the Department of Economics or Finance or Business Administration, but other disciplines that would engage with the public, okay? So political science and law would come to mind because these are disciplines that would require high public engagement, aside, of course, from finance, economics, and other, disciplines. Anyway, I think you're doing this already from what, based on the remarks mentioned by Dr. Bautista. You're trying to create a pool of experts at the university level. So that can also be an enabling environment to encourage people to become resource persons. One thing that can be worth exploring as well would be to come up with popular articles, but these are refereed. It can be done. East Asia Forum is a good model wherein you can write a commentary or, a news article. In journalism parlance, you can call them interpretive articles or explanatory articles. But anyway, these are popular articles that are evaluated by at least two experts. I know this for a fact because I've written for East Asia Forum already. I've written twice for East Asia Forum already. And yeah, and they are refereed. So the turnaround time is relatively fast. From what I know, from what I've experienced, if you publish, if you submit something now, the feedback that you get from two reviewers would be less than a week. And then after you've made the revisions, the publication would be less than a week as well. So the total process from submission to online publication would be, less than 2 weeks, at least from my experience. But if you're fast in terms of making revisions, it can be in about a week. In my experience, because I try my best to be fast in terms of turnaround time, I think I'm able to publish in less than a week, okay, with regard to the two articles I submitted for East Asia Forum. So take note, these are refereed. So you can try writing for the East Asia Forum because it's multidisciplinary, or maybe LaSalle can come up with its own type of publication that would be both popular and refereed. Okay, so just some food for thought. And of course, part of the enabling environment would be more training for public speaking and popular writing. Or maybe to be more precise, journalistic writing. Because sometimes you would notice that academic writing or scholastic writing would be very different from journalistic writing. But that's not to say that you're not capable of doing that. And usually the best academic writers are able to, quickly adjust to journalistic writing. It can be done. Now, some parting shots before we call it a day. Public engagement is definitely an inherent part of our academic life. As mentioned a while ago, because with regard to organizational communication, we're able to use the classroom as our setting, and there is a multiplier effect uh, there's a multiplier effect with regard to the points that we raise. And of course, with regard to mass communication, even if we don't do media appearances, we also do professorial lectures or public lectures, and we also engage in social media. So that's also part of public engagement. So something that you only need to consider would be media appearance as a small part of it. So what I'm trying to say is we're already doing it. So why not just add more to what we're already doing through media appearances? And of course, as mentioned, perhaps media appearances can now be the new normal insofar as our engagement would be concerned. Because as we noted a while ago, we can only do so much in terms of publishing in refereed journals. The audience is very limited, and sometimes we only end up preaching to the choir or just simply having what we call an echo chamber. But if we do public engagement, then we can engage with different kinds of people, including those who may disagree with some of the points we raise. So we're able to have a real conversation on burning issues of the day. So those are the things that I want to share with you. So thank you very much for bearing with me. These are just two of the major references that I used. If you want to know more, feel free to visit these particular websites to get more information about public intellectualism. So that's all for now. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you very much po, Mr. Arao, for delivering the webinar. So it was a very insightful discussion on public intellectualism. So at this point, I would like to invite everyone. So we are now opening the open forum or the open discussion. So if you have any questions for Mr. Arao, you can open your microphone and your video so you can address it to him. Are there any questions for
Hi, Mr. Arao. Gusto na kitang tawagin Dr. Arao talaga, sir. Yeah, anyway, I'm just maybe curious based on your experience on because there are only select people who get invited to do some media appearances, and I notice, for example, I'm watching a television. If there's an issue, there's a go-to institution wherein these media companies get their speakers. So I'm just wondering how else can, for example, people from the academy make themselves visible in the radar of media companies, so they also get invited when it comes to sharing their issues, their views to the public.
Uh, Okay, thank you for the question. I think part of the enabling environment would be for universities, for example, to have a particular section on specializations and experts. If you have a list of experts in a particular website that's readily searchable, then it can help. And of course, social media engagement of the university. I refer to the official Facebook accounts or the Twitter accounts of, for example, LaSalle, or perhaps the department or the different centers under the university can try their best to promote the studies of particular faculty members. And it wouldn't hurt to tag certain journalists who may have written about it. So tagging them is not tantamount to spamming. For as long as you do it sparingly and not as often as possible, I think that can help. Now, I want to also share with you one. I'm not sure if you'll agree with this, but one dirty little secret among some political analysts. Sometimes you tend to wonder, as Dr. Bautista correctly mentioned, why is it that they get interviewed all the time? And sometimes you can think of more intelligent people to talk to rather than these experts, right? How come? Well, sometimes some more enterprising political analysts, they would have cell phone numbers of these journalists or email addresses even, and then they will look at the newspaper, what are the burning issues of the day, and then they will come up with, quotable quotes or something, something that would be a good sound bite, and then they will text it or they will email it to these journalists. And sometimes that can help in terms of quote unquote promoting yourself. But of course, for academics like us, we are too conscious of self-promotion, and in fact, we try to veer away from self-promotion, and we cannot, and of course, we cannot blame each other if we refuse to promote ourselves. So sometimes, if we don't want to promote ourselves, that's where the university itself would have to come up with a more proactive role in promoting the faculty themselves. I'm tempted to say that each of us should have a more conscious effort of promoting ourselves on social media. Okay, but of course, it depends on your preference. If you don't want to do that, then that would be fine as well. But as I said a while ago, sometimes the university can only do so much in terms of promotion. So all of us would need to have a conscious effort of promoting our work. So we shouldn't look at it as self-promotion or ego feeding or feeding our own egos. Whenever we promote our works on social media, it's because we want to share something. And if we want to tag journalists in the process of promoting our own work, it's also okay because some journalists may find it useful. And if they find it useful, that's where you get to book those interviews. I wouldn't worry too much about LaSalle as an institution because I don't want to sound patronizing, but it's a very prestigious school. It has a name, it has a reputation. So people or journalists would tend to gravitate toward LaSalle, along with the other quote-unquote best schools in the country. So it's just a matter of maximizing, the promotion of your works.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. I think Dr. Emmy has a question.
Hindi naman, nag-on lang ako.
Parang si
Medyo-
Dr. Luz
may
meron.
question ako. Okay.
Ayan po.
I just
May tanong
wanted
yata
to...
si Dr. Luz sa
Yeah,
make-up
yeah.
daw.
Yeah, ako Luz.
Please, sa Zoom yata, pwede mo ilagay na mag-makeup ka sa Zoom, di ba? Okay. Mr. Arao, I just wanted to congratulate you for being the new editor-in-chief of Media Asia, which I understand is Scopus accredited as well. So congratulations. I wanted to find out because we have a master in marketing communication, and recently we just had our thesis campaign defense for today. We finished it today. So is there like a room for publication of students' works in Media Asia? I mean, like, this is actually like a campaign. So they might, they have very interesting messages, advocacies that may be good for publications in a journal, in a Scopus journal like Media Asia.
Yes, we accept publications from scholars in general. So it's not just faculty members, but also graduate students. So
Okay.
we're more than willing to evaluate the manuscripts. Pero yun na nga, kung marketing communication yan, mas mahalaga po sana na may media angle. Of course, communication is important, pero mas maganda yung, kasi Media Asia eh. So we want to look at various aspects of media, like journalism, entertainment, advertising and public relations, and other aspects of media. Mas maganda po sana may media angle para mas malaki yung chances na ma-accept po namin sila. At
Okay,
ma-evaluate
yeah.
ng reviewers. Opo.
Sige, our graduate studies coordinator is here. So baka he can put it in his plan. Mr. Ryan Dewey. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Salamat din po. Tsaka yung palang mga gustong magsulat for Media Asia, we're open to accepting your manuscripts. Total, nabanggit na rin lang ni Ma'am Luz.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi Ian, may question na ako talaga ngayon. Nakalimutan ko yung tatanong ko kanina. Hello, Mr. Arao.
Hello.
I'm Emmy Sarial.
Dani na lang.
Danny, hello. My question is about our research publications, which are normally termed as researches in the ivory tower, right? Like, so even if we have very technical, yung language, yung jargon, is there a chance that we can promote our research, especially sa field na economics, di ba? Yung economics kasi, especially if you present your econometric model, which to many doesn't make sense, but in reality, there's so much sense in it. So, of course, when we submit in research journals, we cannot do away with the technical, diba, stuff. So, how do we present ourselves na it can be consumed or it can be used by laymen?
Well, okay. Kasi I'm trying to draw from experience with being editor of Ibon Foundation, which also does socioeconomics. Of course, from our part, we try to, well, yung pinaka-technique talaga diyan is to try to do away with the equations and to try to explain the equations in a way na na talagang hindi ka gumagamit masyado ng jargon, or at least pinapaliwanag kung ano yung jargon na ito. So, kumbaga parang one of the techniques that we've adopted in Ibon is paano mo ipapaliwanag yung economics sa isang 7-year-old, okay? So, usually, pagka naintindihan ito ng isang 7, kasi we have, yung Ibon Facts and Figures caters to high school students. So, we try to have a publication, nakalimutan ko na yung pangalan, na address naman sa elementary school students. So we try to explain aspects of the economy and certain concepts ng economics in a way that can be understood by ordinary people. So it's very, very challenging. Actually, it's much easier said than done. And in fact, the main challenge for us is how do we simplify without being simplistic. So that's also another factor. So how do we do that? Actually, parang ang ginagawa namin, okay, so yun yung isang technique ipapabasa sa 7-year-old. So I'm not sure about Lasal, pero you may consider, for example, drafting something and then ipapabasa mo siya hindi sa colleague mo within the department kundi tagalabas ng ng disiplina mo. So for example, if a policy, hindi policy. For example, if a colleague from another discipline will be able to properly understand what you're trying to say, then most likely people will be able to understand that as well. So, kumbaga parang so you can consider it as a form of refereeing process. Pero this time, the referee will be someone who's totally outside your particular specialization. And the objective of the refereeing process is not to judge the content, but to judge the understandability of your manuscript. So I'm not sure if that can work, but at Ibon, somehow it works. Kasi parang we have a fresh pair of eyes evaluating it as an outsider na mas nakikita kung ano yung kalakasan at kahinaan ng mga sinusulat namin. And ayun, believe it or not, natututo rin kami mula doon sa ganong klaseng experience kung ipapabasa namin sa mga tagalabas. So,
yes. Follow-up question about that. Kasi you notice yung view from TAF namin, very few contributes to that column. Actually, Lasal has 3 Meron kaming Manila Standard, Manila Times, and Business World. But very few contributes to those newspaper columns. Kaya I was wondering, kahit ako nahihirapan ako like even if I have publications, I don't know how to present it in a column format, newspaper column format na I don't know if I'm going to cut it into many parts, right? And then even the citation, kasi di ba sa academe naman parang problema tayo mamaya merong makakita ng newspaper column natin tapos ma-plagiarism tayo, di ba? Kasi we cannot put the entire context of our publication sa journal. So yun din yung isang problema namin actually. Marami kami nakaka-publish pero kukunti yung pumupunta sa broadsheets para i-present yung research findings namin. So, is there any framework that we can follow to do that?
I'm sorry if I will have to ask to answer you with another question. Kasama ba sa promotion or sa points yung yung mga newspaper publications or media?
Very soon. Very soon. Okay. Very, very soon. Kasi we're now doing we're revising the faculty manual. And our VRCOB, our college, would revise it that way, that contributions, kasi we want to have social impact kasi, na yung papers that we write, we should disseminate it so that we can gain social impact. So, mataas na yung relevance talaga, kaya inuunahan ko na yung mga faculty namin na kailangan magsulat kayo sa dyaryo, particularly offshoots of your research.
Yeah, thank you for the information. Kasi it can help as an enabling environment kasi minsan yung mga kahit naman tayo yung conscious tayo doon sa number of points na nakukuha natin for promotion or for tenure. So that can help as an enabling environment. Kaya lang para sa akin, understandable na maraming mga tao would tend to struggle with regard to journalistic writing kasi ibang-iba siya talaga sa academic writing. Number of words pa lang parang nasa 800 to 1,000 for a column article. Tapos dapat popular yung language mo, hindi ka So the only way to do that would be to really train ourselves to write column articles. So may mga, actually there are workshops.
May training ba kayong ganon?
Yes,
Danny?
we do that. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Ernie. Emmy pala, sorry.
Emmy,
Emmy. Kasi ano Emmy, yung pwede namang gawin yan kasi workshop yan na parang, well, just to give you an idea ha. So, syempre, parang i-discuss kung ano yung parts ng column writing, kung paano siya sinusulat, ano yung mga case studies. And then part of the training, at ito yung pinakamahalaga, workshop yung mga sinusulat sa inyo. So, kumbaga parang bibigyan ka ng time limit, let's say in 30 minutes, you have to write, let's say, a 500-word column on your chosen topic. Tapos, i-assess yan, i-edit yan in terms of form and content para tingnan yung kalakasan at kahinaan ng mga sinusulat. So, I'm not sure if that can help, pero yung mga ganong exercises can help us understand better yung rudiments of column writing. So, isang level yan. Now, the other level of learning how to write columns would be to read from the best columnists there existing, di ba? Who are some of the best. Siyempre, alam nyo na yan. The likes of Luis Teodoro, the likes of sino pa ba? Wala na ako
Puro entertainment pinabasa ko.
No. Luis Teodoro. Actually, si Ben, ayun, wala si Ben ngayon. Actually, si Ben, magaling naman magsulat yan. Actually, yung The View from Taft in general, respectable naman yung panulat yung estilo ng pagsusulat ng mga tao ron. So, I remember well yung A View from Taft, dekada 90 pa yata yan when I was still teaching.
Si Professor Elfren Cruz writes very well in View from Taft. Yeah.
Exactly. So, yun, maraming
Pero konti lang sila na gifted na ganun na hindi nag-aral ng journalism, pero they have the flair for writing talaga.
Kasi parang tiyagaan din po kasi siya. I'm not sure, hindi ko alam yung background ni na Dr.
Elfren
tsaka ni na Dr. T. Elfren tsaka ni na Dr. T. Hanky. Pero I would guess that they are writing more often than other people Kasi the secret to journalistic writing is you have to practice it constantly.
Yes.
So kasi kapag hindi constant, wala kang regular routine sa journalistic writing, parang madaling makakalimutan yung simplicity in writing. So balik ka na naman dun sa komplikadong pagsusulat. Actually, academic writing and journalistic writing can go hand in hand for as long as you publish regularly, both academically and journalistically. So yun lang naman yung challenge doon. I'm not exactly sure kung financial reward can also be a motivation dun sa A View from Taft na yan. Kasi hindi ko alam kung binabayaran yung mga writers if you want to...
Walang bayad. Oo. Kaya nahirapan din kaming kumuha ng contributors. Pero dapat kasi if they really want to have social impact, even without the incentive, di ba, you should be able to disseminate.
Yeah.
Right? What you researched on.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with that, yes. And I'm sorry for bringing up yung monetary reward. Pero that's also another enabling environment.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Danny, for your answers.
Yeah. Thank you rin, Emmy.
Thank you.